The sound of her weeping carried across the twilight-painted plains of Montana Territory, catching the attention of a weathered cowboy named Austin Sutherland as he guided his horse toward the riverbank in the summer of 1882. He had been riding since dawn, searching for strayed cattle from the ranch where he worked, but something about those broken sobs made him pull his horse to a stop and listen more carefully. In the fading golden light, he could make out the silhouette of a young woman sitting on the rocky shore, her shoulders shaking with the force of her crying. Austin dismounted slowly, tying his horse to a nearby cottonwood tree before making his way down the gentle slope toward the river. His boots crunched on the dry grass, and he cleared his throat gently so as not to startle her too badly. The woman looked up, her face streaked with tears, her dark auburn hair falling loose from its pins. She appeared to be in her early 20s, with green eyes that caught the last rays of sunlight despite being red-rimmed and swollen from crying. Her dress was torn at the hem and covered in dust, suggesting she had traveled far or fallen. She scrambled to her feet, fear flashing across her features as she took in the sight of this stranger approaching her in the gathering dusk. "Easy now," Austin said softly, raising both hands to show he meant no harm. "I don't mean to frighten you, miss. I just heard you crying and wanted to make sure you were all right." He kept his distance, respecting her obvious wariness. At 26 years old, Austin had learned that approaching a scared woman required the same careful movements as working with a spooked horse. His sun-bronzed face held concern rather than threat, and his blue eyes were kind despite the hard life etched in the lines around them. "Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse from crying, "please just leave me alone. I cannot bear any more today." Austin stayed where he was, his hat in his hands now as a sign of respect. "What happened to you? Are you hurt?" He could see now that her hands were scraped, and there was a bruise forming on her left cheek. His jaw tightened at the sight, but he kept his voice gentle and steady. The woman looked at him for a long moment, as if weighing whether to trust this stranger or run. Finally, exhaustion seemed to win over caution, and she sank back down onto the rocks. "My name is Rose Callahan," she said quietly, "and I have nowhere left to go. I have lost everything today." Austin moved a bit closer, settling himself on a large boulder a respectful distance away. The river rushed past them, carrying the day's heat away with it. "I'm Austin Sutherland. I work at the Double J Ranch about 5 miles north of here. Would you tell me what happened?" Sometimes talking about troubles makes them a little lighter to carry. Rose wrapped her arms around herself, staring at the water. "I came to Montana Territory 3 months ago with my father. We were going to start a new life after my mother died back in Ohio. Papa had heard there was good land to be claimed, opportunities for honest work. We stayed in Jamestown, saved every penny from his work at the mill." Her voice cracked, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "This morning he went to work just like always. There was an accident. The machinery caught his arm and he bled to death before the doctor could arrive." Austin felt his chest tighten with sympathy. He had lost his own parents to cholera when he was 17, knew the particular emptiness that came with being suddenly alone in the world. "I'm real sorry for your loss, Miss Callahan. That's a heavy burden to bear. The landlady came to me this afternoon," Rose continued, her words tumbling out now as if a dam had broken. "She said I had 3 days to pay this month's rent or get out. She said a young woman alone had no business staying in her respectable boarding house anyway. I went to the mill to ask for Papa's wages, but the owner said Papa owed him money for damaged equipment, said the accident was Papa's fault for being careless." The bitterness in her voice was sharp as broken glass. "So I walked. I just walked out of town and kept walking until I could not walk anymore. I sat down here and realized I have nothing. No money, no family, nowhere to sleep tonight. I am completely alone." The despair in her voice cut Austin deeply. He sat quiet for a moment, watching the river and thinking. He knew what it was like to have nothing, to feel like the world had turned its back on you. He also knew that sometimes one person reaching out a hand could make all the difference between surviving and giving up entirely. "Miss Callahan," he said finally, "I know we just met, and you have no reason to trust me. But I want you to know that you're not alone anymore, not if you don't want to be. The Double J Ranch where I work, the owner is a good man named John Davidson. His wife Sarah runs the house, and they're always needing help with cooking, cleaning, mending. They're fair people who would give you a chance if I vouched for you." Rose looked at him with those red-rimmed green eyes, suspicion and hope warring on her face. "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." Austin met her gaze steadily. "Because someone helped me once when I had nothing. And because leaving you here alone by this river when night is falling wouldn't be right. I was raised better than that." "But you know nothing about me," Rose protested, though her voice held less resistance now. "I could be anyone. I could be trouble." A small smile touched Austin's weather-beaten face. "Well, are you trouble?" Despite everything, Rose felt the tiniest hint of a smile threaten to break through her despair. "No, I am a decent seamstress, a passable cook, and I know how to work hard. I have always worked hard." "Then that's all you need to be," Austin said simply. He stood up, brushing dust from his worn denim pants. "It's getting dark, Miss Callahan. My horse can carry us both back to the ranch. Mrs. Davidson will give you a hot meal and a place to sleep tonight, and tomorrow we can talk to Mr. Davidson about work. What do you say?" Rose looked at the darkening sky, then at the river, then back at this stranger who had appeared like an answer to a prayer she hadn't even known how to pray. Every instinct told her to be cautious, to protect herself, but what choice did she have? Sleep outside alone and hungry, or trust in the kindness she saw in this cowboy's blue eyes? "All right," she whispered, standing on shaky legs. "Thank you, Mr. Sutherland. I promise I will work hard to repay this kindness." Austin picked up his hat and settled it back on his head. "Just Austin is fine. Come on, let's get you somewhere safe." He helped her up the slope to where his horse waited patiently. The animal was a sturdy bay gelding with intelligent eyes, well-trained and calm. Austin mounted first, then reached down to help Rose up behind him. She hesitated only a moment before taking his hand, surprised by the gentle strength in his grip as he pulled her up. She settled behind him, unsure where to put her hands until the horse started moving, and she instinctively grabbed onto Austin's waist to keep from falling. The ride to the Double J Ranch took about an hour in the fading light. Austin kept the pace easy, conscious of his passengers' exhaustion and emotional state. He pointed out landmarks as they went, his voice a steady comfort in the growing darkness. He told her about the ranch, about Mr. and Mrs. Davidson, who had given him work when he had been down on his luck years ago. He talked about the other ranch hands, making them sound like real people rather than strangers to fear. His words were simple but kind, painting a picture of a place where hard work was valued and people looked out for each other. Rose held on, pressing her cheek against Austin's back as exhaustion finally overtook her. The warmth of another human being, the steady rhythm of the horse's gait, the low rumble of Austin's voice as he spoke, all of it combined to make her feel safer than she had felt since her father died that morning. Tears leaked from her closed eyes, but they were quieter now, the desperate edge of panic fading into simple grief. Austin felt her weight shift and knew she was falling asleep against him. Good, he thought. Let her rest. God knew she needed it after the day she had endured. He guided his horse through the familiar landscape, grateful for the full moon rising to light their way. As the ranch buildings came into view, warm lamplight glowing in the windows, he felt a strange sense of rightness about bringing Rose here. He could not have explained it if anyone asked, but somehow he knew that finding her crying by that river had been meant to happen. The ranch house was a solid two-story structure built of logs and whitewashed boards, surrounded by a handful of outbuildings including a large barn, bunkhouse, and storage sheds. Chickens roosted for the night in their coop, and a few horses moved in the corral, dark shapes against the moonlit sky. Austin rode right up to the main house and dismounted as quietly as he could, then carefully helped Rose down. She swayed on her feet, barely awake, and he steadied her with a hand on her elbow. The front door opened before he could knock, and Sarah Davidson appeared, a motherly woman in her late 40s with graying blonde hair and sharp eyes that took in the situation immediately. "Austin Sutherland, what have you brought home?" "Mrs. Davidson, this is Miss Rose Callahan. She's had about the worst day a person can have, and she needs help. I was hoping you and Mr. Davidson might have room for one more soul around here." Sarah looked at Rose, taking in the torn dress, the bruised face, the exhaustion and grief written in every line of the young woman's body. Her expression softened immediately, maternal instincts rising to the surface. "Oh, you poor dear. Come in right now. Austin, take care of your horse and then come have some supper. There's stew keeping warm." She ushered Rose inside with gentle efficiency, calling over her shoulder, "John, we have a guest who needs tending." Austin led his horse to the barn, grateful that Sarah had not asked too many questions. She was good that way, always had been. She saw a need and met it, questions could come later. He unsaddled the bay, rubbed him down properly, and made sure he had fresh water and feed before heading back to the house. Through the lit window, he could see Sarah moving around the kitchen, and he hoped Rose was settling in all right. When he entered through the kitchen door, he found Rose sitting at the large wooden table, a steaming bowl of beef stew in front of her and a cup of hot coffee beside it. Sarah was bustling around, fetching bread and butter, talking in that soothing way she had that made everyone feel like they were home. John Davidson sat at the head of the table, a big man in his 50s with a thick gray beard and kind eyes. He nodded to Austin. "Have a seat, son. Mrs. Davidson tells me we have a new guest. Miss Callahan, is it?" Rose nodded, swallowing a spoonful of stew. "Yes, sir. And I am so grateful for your hospitality. Austin, I mean Mr. Sutherland, he found me by the river and brought me here. I promise I am a hard worker and would be happy to earn my keep if you would allow me to stay." John exchanged a look with his wife, one of those wordless conversations that happened between people married for many years. Sarah gave a slight nod, and John turned back to Rose. "Why don't you tell us what brought you to be crying by the river, Miss Callahan? We like to know who were sheltering under our roof." So Rose told her story again, this time to the Davidsons, with Austin sitting across from her eating his own supper and adding details about how he found her. She spoke of her father's death, the heartless mill owner, the landlady's ultimatum. Her voice remained steady this time, though her hands shook slightly as she held her spoon. Sarah reached over and patted her hand when she finished speaking. "You poor child. Losing your father like that, and then being treated so poorly on top of it. Well, you are welcome here as long as you need. We can always use help around the house, and if you are good with mending, as you say, well, Lord knows these cowboys tear their clothes faster than I can fix them." She shot a look at Austin that held more affection than rebuke. "I cannot pay you," Rose said quietly. "Not right away. I have no money at all." John waved a big hand dismissively. "We will work it out. room and board in exchange for your help around the house. When you get back on your feet, we can discuss wages. Does that sound fair?" Rose felt tears threaten again, but these were different from the ones she had cried by the river. These were tears of relief, of gratitude for unexpected kindness from strangers. "More than fair. Thank you. Thank you so much." After supper, Sarah showed Rose to a small room on the second floor, simply furnished but clean and comfortable. There was a real bed with a quilt, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, a small wardrobe, and a window that looked out over the ranch yard. Sarah brought her a nightgown to borrow and fresh water for washing. "You get some rest now," Sarah said kindly. "Tomorrow is soon enough to start worrying about work and such. Tonight you just sleep and let yourself grieve. Lord knows you have earned it." When Sarah left, closing the door softly behind her, Rose sank onto the bed and let herself cry again, but this time the tears felt different. Yes, she grieved for her father, missed him with an ache that filled her whole chest. But mixed with the grief was a strange seed of hope. This morning she had woken with a father and a future, however uncertain. By afternoon she had lost everything and wanted to die by that river. Now, as night deepened around the ranch, she had a place to sleep and people who were willing to help her. And she had Austin Sutherland to thank for it. She thought about the cowboy who had found her, his gentle voice and kind eyes. The way he had kept his distance at first, respecting her fear. The careful way he had helped her onto his horse, making her feel safe rather than threatened. His easy conversation during the ride, designed to distract and comfort. Rose had met many men in her 22 years, and few of them had shown such natural consideration for a woman's feelings and safety. Her father had been one of the good ones, always treating her mother with respect and affection. She wondered if Austin Sutherland might be cut from the same cloth. Downstairs, Austin was having a similar conversation with John while Sarah cleaned up the kitchen. "You did a good thing tonight, bringing that girl here," John said, packing tobacco into his pipe. "She would not have lasted the night out there alone. Wolves, weather, or worse could have gotten her." "I could not just leave her," Austin said simply. "Not after what she told me happened. Losing her father like that and then being treated so cruelly. It was not right." John lit his pipe and studied Austin through the smoke. "You are a good man, Austin. You have got your father's heart from what you have told me about him." He paused, then added carefully, "Sarah thinks that girl is pretty as a picture, and she noticed you looking at her a certain way." Austin felt heat rise in his cheeks. "I just met her a few hours ago. I was not looking at her any particular way." John chuckled. "If you say so." "I am just saying, she seems like a decent girl who has had some bad luck. And you are a decent man who has been alone too long. Sometimes good things come from bad situations." He stood, stretching. "Anyway, get some rest. Tomorrow is another work day and those cattle do not herd themselves." Austin made his way to the bunkhouse where he shared quarters with 3 other ranch hands. They were already asleep, snoring in their bunks. He undressed quietly and lay down on his own narrow bed, hands behind his head, staring at the dark ceiling. He kept seeing Rose's face, the way she had looked at him with those tear-filled green eyes, the exhaustion and despair etched into her features. He kept hearing her broken voice saying she had nowhere left to go, that she had lost everything. Something had shifted in him when he heard her crying by that river. He could not name it exactly, but he knew his life had changed in that moment, that finding Rose Callahan was going to matter in ways he could not yet understand. With that thought settling into his chest like a promise, Austin finally drifted off to sleep. The next morning dawned clear and hot, promising another scorching summer day. Austin was up before sunrise, as always, doing his share of the morning chores before breakfast. He fed the horses, checked on the cattle in the near pastures, and hauled water from the well. The physical work felt good, familiar, grounding him after the strange events of the previous evening. When the breakfast bell rang from the main house, he cleaned up at the pump and headed over with the other ranch hands. The kitchen was full of good smells, bacon and eggs and fresh biscuits. Sarah was at the stove, and to Austin's surprise, Rose was beside her, helping to dish up the food. She wore a simple calico dress that Sarah must have lent her, and her auburn hair was neatly pinned up. The bruise on her cheek looked worse in the morning light, a dark purple stain against her pale skin, but her eyes were clear and she moved with purpose. She glanced up when the men trooped in, her gaze finding Austin and holding for just a moment before she looked away, a slight flush coloring her cheeks. The ranch hands, a friendly bunch named Tom, Peter, and young Willie, introduced themselves to Rose with polite courtesy, hats in hands. They were good men, Austin knew, hardworking and decent, but he felt an irrational flash of irritation when Tom complimented Rose on the biscuits and made her smile. He pushed the feeling down, confused by it. He had no claim on Rose Callahan, no right to feel possessive just because he had found her first. After breakfast, John laid out the day's work assignments. Austin and Peter would ride out to check the fence lines in the north pasture. Tom would work on repairing the barn roof, and Willie would help Sarah and Rose in the garden. Austin found himself wishing he had been assigned to stay closer to the house, then mentally shook himself. He had a job to do, and Rose was fine here with Sarah watching over her. She did not need him hovering, but as he saddled his horse and prepared to ride out, Rose appeared at the barn door carrying a cloth-wrapped bundle. "Austin," she called softly, and he turned to face her. "Mrs. Davidson said you would be out all day, so I packed you some lunch. It is the least I could do after everything you did for me last night." Austin took the bundle, their fingers brushing briefly in the transfer. The touch sent an unexpected jolt through him, and from the way Rose's eyes widened slightly, he thought she might have felt it too. "Thank you, that is real thoughtful of you." They stood there for a moment, neither quite knowing what to say. Finally, Rose spoke, her voice soft but earnest. "I never properly thanked you, Austin, for stopping when you heard me crying, for listening, for bringing me here. You saved my life last night. I truly believe that." "You do not need to thank me," Austin said, uncomfortable with the weight of her gratitude. "Anyone decent would have done the same." "No," Rose said firmly, "they would not have. Most people would have ridden right past. But you stopped. You cared. That makes you different, and I will not forget it." She looked at him with those green eyes that seemed to see right through to his core, and Austin felt something in his chest shift and settle, like a key turning in a lock he had not known was there. "I am glad I found you," he said simply. "I am glad you are here." Rose smiled, a real smile this time that transformed her whole face despite the bruise. "So am I." Peter called from outside that they needed to get moving, breaking the moment. Austin nodded to Rose and led his horse out into the bright morning. As he rode away from the ranch, he turned in his saddle once and saw her standing in the barn doorway, watching him go. His heart did something strange in his chest, and he knew with absolute certainty that nothing would ever be quite the same again. The days began to settle into a pattern. Austin worked from dawn to dusk, as he always had, herding cattle, mending fences, breaking horses, doing whatever John needed done. Rose worked just as hard at the house, helping Sarah with cooking, cleaning, mending, and all the endless tasks required to keep a ranch household running. She proved to be as skilled as she had claimed, her sewing neat and strong, her cooking steadily improving under Sarah's patient instruction. The bruise on her face faded from purple to yellow to nothing, and the haunted look gradually left her eyes, replaced by something steadier, though the grief for her father remained a quiet constant beneath everything else. Austin found excuses to be near the house more often than strictly necessary. He volunteered to fix the squeaky porch step, to replace some loose shingles on the roof, to build Sarah the new shelves she had mentioned wanting in the pantry. Rose was always there, and they fell into easy conversation whenever their paths crossed. She told him about growing up in Ohio, about her mother who had died when Rose was 19, about the books she loved to read, and her dream of maybe one day opening a dress shop. Austin told her about his childhood in Kansas, about losing his parents and drifting west looking for work, about the satisfaction he found in working with horses and cattle, in the simple, honest labor of ranch life. They were different in many ways, but there was something between them that felt right, natural, as though they had known each other much longer than a few weeks. Sarah noticed, of course, and smiled her knowing smile but said nothing. John noticed too and approved. Tom, Peter, and Willie noticed and teased Austin mercilessly in the bunkhouse, but it was good-natured ribbing among friends. On Sunday afternoon, 3 weeks after Austin had found Rose by the river, he finally worked up the courage to ask her to take a walk with him. They had just finished Sunday dinner, the one meal of the week where everyone ate together in the dining room with the good dishes, and people were lingering over coffee and pie. Austin caught Rose's eye across the table and tilted his head toward the door in silent question. She nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. They walked through the ranch yard and out toward the creek that ran along the eastern boundary of the property. The day was hot, but a breeze made it bearable, carrying the scent of prairie grass and wildflowers. Rose had changed out of her work dress into something nicer, another of Sarah's hand-me-downs that she had altered to fit her own slimmer frame. Austin wore his cleanest shirt, the one he saved for town visits or special occasions, and he had even trimmed his beard that morning. They talked of small things at first, commenting on the weather, the new foal that had been born that week, the upcoming harvest. But as they walked, following the creek into the shade of some cottonwood trees, the conversation deepened. Austin asked Rose how she was really doing, if she was sleeping all right, if she still thought about her father as much. Rose appreciated his directness, the genuine concern in his voice. "I think about Papa every day," she admitted, trailing her fingers through the tall grass as they walked. "Sometimes I wake up and for just a moment I forget he is gone. Then I remember and it hurts all over again." She paused, looking out over the rolling landscape. "But it hurts a little less each day. And being here, having work to do and people around who are kind, it helps. You helped, Austin. You keep helping." Austin felt that now familiar warmth in his chest whenever Rose looked at him a certain way. "I like having you here. The ranch feels different with you in it. Better." Rose stopped walking and turned to face him fully. They were in the shade of the trees now, and the dappled sunlight played across her face, making her eyes look more golden than green. "Austin, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Is there someone special in your life, a sweetheart waiting for you somewhere?" She tried to keep her tone casual, but Austin heard the real question underneath. He shook his head slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. "No. There was a girl once, back in Kansas before my parents died. But that was a long time ago and it came to nothing. I have been alone since then. I guess I never met anyone who made me want to change that." He paused, his heart pounding. "Until now." Rose's breath caught. "Until now." Austin took a step closer, close enough that he could have reached out and touched her if he dared. "Rose, I know it has only been a few weeks. I know you are still grieving and getting your feet under you, but I have to be honest with you because I am not good at pretending. From the moment I saw you by that river, Something in me recognized something in you. I feel like I have been waiting my whole life without knowing what I was waiting for, and then suddenly there you were. I care about you, Rose. More than I probably should this soon, but I cannot help it. Rose's eyes shimmered with tears, but they were not sad tears. I feel it too, she whispered. I have been trying not to, telling myself it was too soon, that I was being foolish. But every time I see you, every time we talk, I feel it growing stronger. You make me feel safe, Austin. You make me feel like maybe I can build a new life here, a good life. And I want you to be part of it. The words hung in the air between them, precious and fragile as blown glass. Austin reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, and cupped her face gently in his calloused hand. His thumb traced softly over the spot where the bruise had been. "Can I kiss you, Rose?" "Yes," she breathed and closed the distance between them. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, a question and an answer all at once. Austin's other hand came up to cradle her face, and Rose's hands found his shoulders, steadying herself against him. The kiss deepened, weeks of growing feelings pouring into this one perfect moment. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Austin rested his forehead against hers. "I am falling in love with you, Rose Callahan," he said softly. "I know it is fast, but it is true." "I am falling in love with you too, Austin Sutherland," Rose replied, her voice full of wonder. "I never expected this. After Papa died, I thought I would never feel anything but grief again, but you make me feel alive." They stood there in the shade of the cottonwoods, holding each other, letting the reality of their feelings settle into certainty. The creek burbled past, birds sang in the branches above, and the world felt full of possibility. Austin kissed her again, softer this time, reverent. When they finally made their way back to the ranch, walking close together, their hands clasped, Sarah took one look at them and smiled knowingly. Over the next few months, Austin and Rose's relationship deepened and grew. They were careful to maintain propriety, always aware that they lived under John and Sarah's roof and reputation mattered in these times. But they spent every free moment together, learning each other's dreams and fears, building a foundation of friendship and trust beneath the romance. Austin taught Rose to ride, and she proved to be a natural horsewoman despite initial nervousness. Rose shared her books with Austin, reading aloud to him in the evenings when the day's work was done. They talked about the future, careful, tentative conversations about what they wanted from life and whether their dreams could fit together. One evening in late September, with the harvest coming in and the air turning crisp with the promise of autumn, Austin asked John if he could speak with him privately. They went to John's study, a small room off the main house filled with ledgers and papers and the smell of pipe tobacco. John poured them each a small whiskey and settled into his chair, eyebrows raised expectantly. Austin turned his hat in his hands, suddenly nervous despite having rehearsed this conversation 100 times in his head. "Sir, I want to ask for your blessing to marry Rose." John leaned back, a smile tugging at his beard. "I wondered when you would get around to this. Does she know you are going to ask her?" "Not yet. I wanted to speak with you first, seeing as how her father is not here to ask. You and Mrs. Davidson have been like parents to her these past months, so it seemed right to talk to you." "That is respectful of you, son. So tell me, why do you want to marry Rose Callahan?" Austin met John's eyes steadily. "Because I love her, sir. Because she is the best person I have ever known, strong and kind and brave. Because I want to build a life with her, a family. Because when I think about my future, I cannot imagine it without her in it." He paused, then added honestly, "And because I do not have much to offer her except hard work and a true heart, but I swear I will spend the rest of my life making her happy if she will have me." John studied Austin for a long moment, seeing the earnestness in the young man's face, the determination and love shining clear in his eyes. He thought about the scared, grieving girl Austin had brought home months ago, and the confident, happy young woman she had become. Much of that transformation was due to the care and affection this cowboy had shown her. "You have my blessing, Austin," John said finally. "I think you will make Rose a good husband, and I think she will make you a good wife. You are both good people who have found each other at the right time." He reached into his desk and pulled out a small velvet pouch. "My mother's ring. Sarah and I talked about this, and we want you to give this to Rose when you propose. We have no daughters of our own, and Rose has become like family to us. It would mean a lot to Sarah to see this ring on Rose's finger." Austin took the pouch with shaking hands, overcome with emotion. Inside was a simple gold band with a small ruby surrounded by tiny pearls. It was beautiful in its simplicity, clearly well loved and cared for over the years. "Sir, I do not know what to say. This is too much." "It is exactly right," John said firmly. "Now, do you have a plan for how you are going to ask her?" Austin did have a plan, as it turned out. The next Sunday, he asked Rose if she would like to go riding with him, maybe have a picnic out by the river. Sarah packed them a basket with fried chicken, fresh bread, cheese, apples, and a jar of sweet tea. Rose wore her prettiest dress, the blue one she had finished sewing just last week from fabric Sarah had bought her in town. Austin wore his good clothes and had even gotten a haircut from Willie, who fancied himself handy with scissors. They rode out together, Rose on a gentle mare named Daisy that Austin had been training for her, Austin on his faithful bay. The day was perfect, warm but not hot, with a brilliant blue sky dotted with white clouds. They rode for about an hour, following the river upstream to a spot Austin had scouted out earlier in the week. It was a beautiful place where the river widened into a peaceful pool, surrounded by trees showing the first touches of autumn color. The grass was soft and green, and wildflowers still bloomed in sheltered spots. Austin spread out the blanket he had brought and helped Rose dismount. They settled down to eat, talking and laughing easily as they always did. Rose told a funny story about the chickens getting into Sarah's vegetable garden and the chaos that ensued. Austin described the new colt he was working with, a spirited little thing with more attitude than sense. It was comfortable and perfect, exactly what Austin had hoped for. After they ate, they lay back on the blanket, watching clouds drift by overhead. Austin's heart was pounding so hard he was sure Rose must be able to hear it. He turned on his side, propping himself up on one elbow to look at her. She met his gaze and smiled, reaching up to touch his face. "This is perfect," she said softly. "Thank you for bringing me here." "Rose," Austin said, his voice suddenly serious, "there is something I need to ask you." She must have heard the change in his tone because she sat up, eyes widening. "What is it?" Austin sat up too, taking both her hands in his. His prepared speech flew right out of his head, and he found himself just speaking from the heart. "When I found you crying by the river that night, I had no idea my whole life was about to change. I thought I was just helping someone in trouble. But you were not just someone, Rose. You were everything I did not know I was looking for. These past months with you have been the happiest of my life. You make me want to be better, do better, build something that lasts. I love you with everything I am, and I want to spend the rest of my life showing you how much." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the ring, holding it up so it caught the sunlight. "Rose Callahan, will you marry me?" Tears spilled down Rose's cheeks as she looked at the ring, then at Austin's face, seeing nothing but love and hope and nervous anticipation there. She thought about the girl she had been just a few months ago, broken and hopeless, wanting to die by the river. She thought about this man who had found her in her darkest moment and brought light back into her life with his gentle words and constant care. She thought about the future stretching ahead of them, full of possibility and promise. "Yes," she said, her voice strong despite the tears. "Yes, Austin, I will marry you. I love you so much." Austin's face broke into the widest smile Rose had ever seen on him. With shaking hands, he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as though it had been made for her. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her, pouring all his joy and relief and love into that kiss. They clung to each other there by the river, in almost the same spot where their story had begun, and promised themselves to each other under the wide Montana sky. When they rode back to the ranch that afternoon, Rose's hand resting on Austin's arm as they guided their horses side by side, Sarah took one look at Rose's glowing face and the ring on her finger and let out a whoop of joy. She pulled Rose into a tight hug, then Austin, talking a mile a minute about wedding plans and how happy she was. John shook Austin's hand with a grip that conveyed pride and approval, then hugged Rose and welcomed her officially to the family. Tom, Peter, and Willie heard the news and insisted on a celebration, breaking out a bottle of whiskey John had been saving and toasting the happy couple, until everyone was laughing and loose with joy. That night, after the celebrating had died down and everyone had gone to bed, Austin and Rose sat together on the porch, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. The stars were brilliant overhead, and the night was full of the sounds of crickets and wind in the grass. "How did we get so lucky?" Rose murmured. "From the worst day of my life to this, it hardly seems possible." Austin pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "I think sometimes life breaks us down so it can build us back up into something stronger. We both lost so much, but we found each other." "That has to mean something." "It means everything," Rose said, turning to look up at him. "You are my everything, Austin Sutherland, and you are mine, Rose Callahan," he smiled. Soon to be Rose Sutherland, she smiled back, warmth flooding through her. "I like the sound of that." They were married 6 weeks later, on a crisp November day when the aspens had turned to gold and the sky was impossibly blue. Sarah had worked herself into a frenzy preparing for the wedding, determined to give Rose the celebration she deserved. She sewed Rose a beautiful dress from cream-colored silk, simple but elegant, with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. John arranged for a preacher to come out from Jamestown, and Sarah invited half the county, it seemed, turning the wedding into the social event of the season. The ceremony took place in the ranch's yard, with a simple arch that Austin and the other hands had built and decorated with late-season flowers and greenery. Rose walked toward Austin on John's arm, and when Austin saw her coming toward him in that beautiful dress, her face radiant with happiness, he felt his eyes sting with tears. She was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen, and she had agreed to be his wife. He could hardly believe his good fortune. They exchanged vows in front of their gathered friends and neighbors, promising to love and honor each other through whatever life brought their way. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Austin kissed Rose with such tenderness that Sarah openly wept into her handkerchief. The celebration that followed was full of good food, music, dancing, and laughter. Someone had brought a fiddle, someone else a guitar, and they played well into the evening while people danced in the yard under strings of lanterns Sarah had hung from the trees. Austin and Rose danced together, her hand in his arm around her waist, moving to the music and feeling like they were the only two people in the world. Rose looked up at her new husband, seeing the love shining clear in his blue eyes, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude for this second chance at life and love. "Happy," Austin murmured as they swayed together. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Rose replied honestly. "You kept your promise, you know. That first night when you found me, you said I was not alone anymore if I did not want to be. You have been keeping that promise every day since. And I will keep it for the rest of our lives," Austin promised, pulling her closer. When the party finally wound down, Austin and Rose retired to the small cabin that John had offered them as a wedding gift. It was a simple structure about 100 yards from the main house, just one large room with a sleeping loft, but John and Austin had spent the past weeks fixing it up and making it comfortable. Sarah and Rose had sewn curtains for the windows and a quilt for the bed. There was a small stove for cooking and heating, a table with 2 chairs, a dresser Austin had built with his own hands. It was not much, but it was theirs, the first real home either of them had called their own in years. Austin carried Rose over the threshold, making her laugh with the old-fashioned gesture. He set her down gently in the middle of their new home, and they stood there for a moment, just looking at each other, the weight of the day and the promise of the night ahead making them both suddenly shy, despite all the time they had spent together. Rose reached up and touched Austin's face, tracing the line of his jaw with gentle fingers. "I was so scared when you found me by that river. I thought my life was over, but it was really just beginning." Austin caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "You saved me too, you know. I did not realize how empty my life was until you filled it with light." They came together then, their kiss slow and deep, taking their time exploring this new aspect of their relationship. Everything that came after was tender and sweet, 2 people who loved each other deeply learning new ways to express that love. Austin was gentle and patient, always making sure Rose was comfortable, that she felt safe and cherished. Rose gave herself to him completely, trusting him with all that she was. They made love and then lay tangled together in their marriage bed, talking softly and making each other laugh before loving again as the moon traced its arc across the sky. The first years of their marriage were full of simple joys and hard work. Austin continued working at the Double J Ranch, taking on more responsibility as John began to trust him with managing some of the cattle operations. Rose kept helping Sarah at the house, but also began taking in sewing from some of the neighboring ranches, building a reputation for her fine stitching and fair prices. They saved every penny they could, dreaming of the day when they might buy their own piece of land and start their own ranch. In the summer of 1884, 2 years after that night by the river, Rose realized she was pregnant. She suspected for a few weeks before she was certain, noticing the changes in her body and the way certain smells made her feel queasy. When she was sure, she waited for the perfect moment to tell Austin. He had been out on the range for 3 days with some of the other hands, moving cattle to new grazing land, and she knew he would be tired and hungry when he got back. She prepared his favorite meal, roast chicken with potatoes and carrots, and baked a dried apple pie for dessert. When Austin came home that evening, dirty and exhausted but smiling to see her, Rose fed him and fussed over him and then took his hand and placed it on her still flat belly. It took him a moment to understand what she was telling him, but when he did, his face transformed with wonder and joy. "A baby. We are having a baby. We are having a baby," Rose confirmed, laughing at his stunned expression. "I am about 3 months along, I think. The baby should come in early spring." Austin pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully as though she had suddenly become fragile. "Rose, this is the best news. I am going to be a father." He pulled back to look at her face, suddenly concerned. "Are you feeling all right? Is the baby all right? Do you need anything?" Rose cupped his face in her hands, amused and touched by his instant protectiveness. "I am fine. The baby is fine." I am healthy and strong, and Sarah says first pregnancies can take longer than you think. We have plenty of time to prepare." But Austin threw himself into preparing with a vengeance. He built a beautiful cradle from smooth pine wood, working on it every evening by lamplight, sanding it until there was not a single rough edge that could harm delicate baby skin. He carved a simple design into the headboard, roses and leaves intertwined, a permanent reminder of their love. Rose sewed tiny clothes and blankets, and Sarah knitted booties and caps, the two women spending hours together talking about babies and motherhood, and the strange, wonderful process of bringing new life into the world. As Rose's belly grew round and full, Austin became even more tender and attentive if such a thing were possible. He would not let her lift anything heavy, insisted she rest in the afternoons, rubbed her swollen feet in the evenings. He talked to the baby through Rose's belly, telling their unborn child stories about the ranch and the horses and how much they were looking forward to meeting them. Rose would laugh and run her fingers through Austin's hair, feeling so full of love she thought she might burst with it. Their son was born on a cool morning in April of 1885, after a long night of labor that left Rose exhausted but triumphant. Sarah acted as midwife, having delivered enough foals and calves to know her way around a birth, and she was calm and competent throughout. Austin paced outside the cabin, nearly wearing a groove in the dirt, until Sarah finally called him in to meet his child. When he saw Rose propped up in bed, sweaty and pale but smiling, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in one of the blankets she had sewn, his heart nearly stopped. "Come meet your son," Rose said softly, and Austin approached on shaking legs. She pulled back the blanket so he could see the baby's face, tiny and red and perfect. "I was thinking we could name him after my father, if that is all right with you. James Austin Sutherland." Austin could not speak for a moment, overwhelmed by the sight of his wife and son and the reality of the family they had created. Finally, he found his voice, rough with emotion. "James Austin is perfect. He is perfect. You are perfect." He leaned down and kissed Rose gently, then carefully touched one finger to the baby's tiny hand. James immediately gripped it, his hold surprisingly strong, and Austin felt something in his chest expand and settle into a new configuration built around protecting and providing for this child. James was a good baby, healthy and strong-lunged, keeping them busy but not overly difficult. Austin was a natural father, patient and loving, happy to walk the floor with a crying baby in the middle of the night so Rose could rest. Rose nursed James and sang to him and marveled at the miracle of his existence. They had created this life together, this perfect little person who was part of both of them. When James was about 6 months old, John and Sarah called Austin and Rose to the main house for a serious conversation. They sat in the living room, James sleeping peacefully in Rose's arms, while John and Sarah exchanged one of their significant looks. "We have been doing some thinking," John began, "and we wanted to talk to you both about something important. Sarah and I are not getting any younger. My back has been giving me more trouble lately, and we have been talking about stepping back from running the ranch so actively. Now, we are not ready to retire completely," Sarah added quickly, seeing the alarm on Austin and Rose's faces. "But we need to start planning for the future. We have no children of our own, no one to leave all this to when we are gone." John leaned forward, his expression serious but warm. "Austin, you have been working here for almost 7 years now. You know this ranch as well as I do, maybe better in some ways. You are smart and hardworking, and you care about the land and the animals. Rose, you have been like a daughter to us. We love you both, and we love that little boy in your arms." "What we are trying to say," Sarah interjected, is that we want you to consider becoming partners in the ranch. John would draw up papers making you part owners, with the understanding that when we pass, everything would eventually come to you. Austin and Rose stared at them in shock. Finally, Austin found his voice. "Sir, madam, that is incredibly generous. But we could not possibly accept something like that. This ranch is yours. You built it from nothing." "Exactly," John said firmly. "We built it from nothing because someone gave us a chance when we were young and struggling. Now we have the opportunity to give you the same chance, except even better. You would not be starting from nothing. You would be starting with an established operation and our guidance. It makes sense, Austin. You are already doing half the managing anyway. This just makes it official." Rose looked at Austin, saw the conflict on his face. They had been saving to buy their own land someday, but it would take years more to save enough for a place even half as good as the Double J. This offer was beyond anything they could have hoped for. But it also felt too much, too big a gift to accept. "Can we think about it?" Rose asked quietly. "This is a huge decision and we want to make sure we consider it properly." "Of course," Sarah said, smiling. "Take all the time you need, but know that the offer comes from the heart. You are family to us. Family takes care of each other." Over the next few weeks, Austin and Rose talked long into the nights about John and Sarah's offer. They weighed the pros and cons, discussed their dreams and fears. In the end, what decided them was the realization that they already considered the Double J their home. They loved this land, these people. Taking ownership would not change what they did day to day. It would just secure their future and James's future in a way they never could have managed on their own. They accepted the partnership, and John drew up the papers with a lawyer from Jamestown, making everything legal and official. Austin and Rose now owned a third of the ranch, with the agreement that their share would increase over time until they eventually inherited the whole operation. It felt surreal and wonderful and terrifying all at once. They were landowners now, with real equity and a stake in their future. Life continued its steady rhythm. James grew from baby to toddler, learning to walk and talk and get into everything. Austin taught him about horses and cattle almost as soon as he could walk, taking the boy with him around the ranch whenever it was safe. Rose continued her sewing business while also taking on more of the household management, as Sarah's arthritis made some tasks more difficult. The ranch prospered under their combined care, the herd growing, the land well managed, their reputation solid. In the fall of 1887, Rose gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Eleanor Sarah Sutherland, after Sarah, who had become like a mother to Rose. Eleanor had Rose's red hair and Austin's blue eyes, a striking combination that made everyone who met her comment on her beauty. She was a more challenging baby than James had been, fussy and particular, but Austin and Rose had the advantage of experience this time and weathered the sleepless nights with better grace. James adored his little sister, wanting to help take care of her constantly. At 3 years old, he was already serious and responsible beyond his years, a little cowboy in training who followed Austin everywhere and soaked up everything his father taught him. Watching Austin with their children, seeing his patience and love and dedication, made Rose fall even more deeply in love with him if such a thing were possible. One evening, when Eleanor was about a year old and James was 4, the whole family sat together on the porch of their cabin watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. James was chattering about a calf that had been born that day, his small hands gesturing excitedly as he described every detail. Eleanor sat in Rose's lap, chewing on a wooden toy Austin had carved for her. Austin had his arm around Rose, and she leaned into his solid warmth, feeling utterly content. "Do you ever think about that night by the river?" Rose asked softly, careful not to interrupt James's monologue. Austin pulled her a little closer. "Sometimes, usually when I am counting my blessings, which is just about every day." He looked at her, his eyes full of warmth and love. "My life divided into before and after that night. Before, I was just existing, going through the motions. After, I started really living." "You saved me," Rose said, not for the first time but always meaning it with her whole heart. "We saved each other," Austin corrected gently. "You gave me purpose, Rose. You gave me a family, a real home, a reason to build instead of just survive. I would do it all again 1,000 times, just to end up right here with you." They sat there as the sun sank below the horizon and the first stars appeared, their children safe and happy, their life together everything they had dreamed and more. The ranch spread out around them, land they now owned and would pass down to their children and their children's children. From the main house came the smell of Sarah's cooking and the sound of John's laughter. Everything felt right, settled, exactly as it should be. Years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the growing of their children. In 1890, Rose gave birth to their third child, another son they named Daniel John Sutherland. Daniel was a happy baby, easy and cheerful, laughing more often than he cried. James, now 7, and Alina, now 3, both doted on their baby brother. The cabin was bursting at the seams with their growing family, so Austin and the ranch hands spent a summer building an addition, adding 2 bedrooms and expanding the main living space. It was still modest compared to some ranch houses, but it was theirs and it was full of love. John's health began to decline gradually through the early 1890s. His back problems worsened, and he developed a cough that would not go away no matter what remedies Sarah tried. But he remained in good spirits, content to spend more time teaching James about ranching and bouncing Alina and Daniel on his knee, while telling tall tales that made them giggle. Sarah remained spry and sharp, running the household with efficient affection, though she too showed signs of aging, her hair fully white now and her movements a bit slower. In the spring of 1893, John fell ill with pneumonia. Despite Sarah and Rose's best efforts to nurse him back to health, his weakened lungs could not fight off the infection. He died peacefully in his bed with Sarah holding his hand, Austin and Rose there to say goodbye to the man who had been like a father to them both. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch he had built, under a granite marker that read, "John Davidson, beloved husband and friend, 1832–1893. Sarah grieved deeply but quietly, the way she did everything. She continued living in the main house, and Austin and Rose made sure she was never alone unless she wanted to be. She loved having the children visit, and they loved their grandmother Sarah, as they called her. She taught Alina to sew and bake, and she told all 3 children stories about their grandfather and the early days of the ranch. With John's passing, Austin and Rose became the full owners of the Double J Ranch, just as John and Sarah had planned. It was bittersweet, owning the land outright but losing the man who had made it all possible. Austin felt the weight of responsibility heavily, determined to honor John's memory by running the ranch well and preserving what John had built. Rose supported him in every way she could, managing the household and finances with the same steady competence she brought to everything. The ranch continued to prosper through the 1890s. Austin expanded the herd, experimented with new breeds, and built a reputation for raising quality cattle. Other ranchers sought his advice, and he became a respected voice in the local cattlemen's association. Rose's sewing business grew as well, to the point where she had more orders than she could handle alone. She began teaching Alina the trade, passing down the skills that had helped her survive when she had nothing. James grew into a fine young man, tall and strong like his father, with the same gentle way with horses and cattle. He was responsible and hardworking, and it was clear he would take over the ranch someday and run it well. Alina was bright and creative, with a quick mind and a talent for both sewing and drawing. She talked about maybe becoming a teacher someday, or perhaps opening that dress shop Rose had once dreamed of. Daniel was the comedian of the family, always making people laugh, but he was also showing an aptitude for working with horses that impressed even Austin. In 1898, Sarah passed away in her sleep at the age of 72. She had lived to see James reach 18, Alina 14, and Daniel 8. She had lived to see the ranch prosper and her adopted family thrive. They buried her next to John on the hill, and the whole county turned out for the funeral, testimony to the impact she had made on everyone who knew her. Rose grieved as though she had lost her own mother, because in every way that mattered, she had. Sarah had taken in a desperate, grieving girl and given her a home, a family, a future. Rose would never forget that kindness. With Sarah's passing, Austin and Rose became the elder generation on the ranch. It felt strange at first, looking around and realizing they were now the ones the younger ranch hands looked to for guidance and decisions. But they settled into the role, drawing on the wisdom John and Sarah had imparted over the years. The new century arrived with hope and celebration. On New Year's Eve going into 1900, the whole ranch celebrated together, everyone gathering at the main house for a feast and dancing. James, now 18 and nearly as tall as his father, danced with a pretty girl from a neighboring ranch named Alice, and Austin and Rose exchanged knowing looks. Alina, 14 and increasingly beautiful, was already turning heads, though she was more interested in her books than in boys at the moment. Daniel, 10 years old and full of energy, ran around with the other children, drunk on excitement and staying up past bedtime. Austin and Rose danced together as they had at their wedding 17 years earlier, moving to fiddle music in a room full of people they loved. Austin looked at his wife, now 40 years old but still beautiful to him, her red hair showing just a few threads of silver, her green eyes still bright and full of life. She had given him everything good in his life, every joy he treasured. "What are you thinking?" Rose asked, smiling up at him. "I am thinking about a night 18 years ago when I heard a woman crying by a river and my whole life changed," Austin said honestly. "I am thinking about how every good thing in my life traces back to that moment." Rose's eyes shimmered with emotion. "You told me that night that I was not alone anymore. Do you remember?" "I remember every word I said to you. You kept that promise, Austin. Every single day for 18 years you have kept it. You have loved me, protected me, built this beautiful life with me. You have given me a family, a home, a purpose. I was broken when you found me and you helped me become whole again." Austin pulled her closer, resting his cheek against her hair. "We healed each other, sweetheart. We built each other back up into something stronger than either of us could have been alone. That is what love does." They held each other as the century turned, surrounded by the life they had built together from that desperate beginning by the river. In the years that followed, they watched their children grow into adults and begin building lives of their own. James married Alice in 1902 and started his own family, eventually taking over much of the day-to-day ranch management. Alina became a teacher in Jamestown, beloved by her students and eventually marrying a kind shopkeeper who adored her. Daniel worked the ranch alongside his father and brother, never quite ready to settle down, content to be the fun uncle who taught his nieces and nephews to ride and fish. Austin and Rose grew old together gracefully, weathering the changes that time brought to their bodies, but never losing the deep connection that had formed that night by the river. They still held hands when they walked, still kissed each other good morning and good night, still found joy in simple moments together. The ranch they had inherited had grown and prospered, and now supported not just their family but the families of their children and several ranch hands. The Sutherland name became well known and respected throughout Montana, synonymous with quality cattle, fair dealing, and strong family values. On a warm summer evening in 1912, when Austin was 56 and Rose 52, they took a walk together out to the river where their story had begun. They had done this periodically over the years, returning to the spot where they had first met, remembering and honoring the journey that had brought them here. They settled on the same rocks where Rose had once sat crying and hopeless, but now she sat nestled against Austin's side, his arm around her, both of them content and at peace. 30 years, Rose marveled, looking at the ring that still graced her finger, worn smooth now by 3 decades of wear. Has it really been 30 years since you found me here? Best 30 years of my life, Austin confirmed, pressing a kiss to her temple. And hopefully we have 30 more ahead of us. Rose laughed softly. I do not think we get to live to 100, my love. But whatever time we have left, I want to spend every moment of it with you. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the river flow past just as it had 30 years ago, constant and eternal. So much had changed since that desperate night, yet some things remained exactly the same. The river still rushed over its rocks. The cottonwood still rustled in the breeze. The Montana sky still stretched vast and blue overhead, and Austin and Rose still loved each other with the same intensity that had sparked that day when a cowboy's gentle words had changed both their lives forever. Do you ever think about how different things might have been? Rose asked. If you had ridden past that night without stopping, if you had not heard me crying, Austin considered the question seriously. I try not to dwell on what-ifs. But I know this: I would have kept looking for you, even without knowing you existed. My soul would have searched until it found yours. Some things are just meant to be. I believe that too, Rose agreed. I think we were always supposed to find each other. Maybe losing Papa was the price I had to pay to end up here with you. As much as I miss him, I cannot regret a path that led me to this life, to our children, to everything we have built together. They talked as the sun sank lower, reminiscing about their years together, all the joys and challenges they had faced. They talked about their children and grandchildren, the legacy they would leave behind. They made plans for the fall, for the holiday season, for the year ahead. They lived fully in the present while honoring their past and looking forward to their future, exactly as they had always done. As twilight settled over the landscape, they made their way back to the ranch, walking slowly, hands clasped, in no particular hurry. The main house showed lights in the windows where James and Alice lived now with their 4 children. The cabin where Austin and Rose had raised their family stood empty at the moment, waiting for Daniel to marry and fill it with his own family someday. The bunkhouse held a handful of ranch hands, good men who worked hard and respected the Sutherlands. Everywhere Austin and Rose looked, they saw the fruits of their labor, the life they had built from nothing more than determination, hard work, and love. That night, as they settled into bed together in the room they had shared for decades, Austin pulled Rose close against him, her back to his chest, his arm around her waist. This was how they always slept, tucked together like spoons in a drawer, as close as 2 people could be without being one. Rose laced her fingers through his, her thumb tracing over his wedding band. I love you, Austin Sutherland, she whispered into the darkness. Every single day I thank God for sending you to that river to find me." "I love you too, Rose Sutherland," Austin replied, his breath warm against her neck. "You are my heart. You always will be." They drifted off to sleep together, secure in the knowledge of their love and the life they had built. Outside, the Montana night was full of stars, the same stars that had looked down on them that first night 30 years ago when a desperate woman had found hope in a cowboy's gentle words. Those words had been simple, "You are not alone," but they had contained a promise that Austin had spent 3 decades fulfilling. And in keeping that promise, he had received everything he could have ever wanted in return. The years that followed brought more changes, as years always do. Austin and Rose continued to age, their hair turning fully silver, their movements becoming slower and more careful. But their minds remained sharp, and their love remained constant. They celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary in 1925, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even great-grandchildren. The party was huge, with people coming from all over Montana to honor the couple who had become local legends, not for any great deed of heroism, but simply for the way they had loved each other and built a good life through honest work and devotion. James gave a speech that brought tears to everyone's eyes, talking about his parents' love story and how it had shaped him into the man he was. Eleanor played piano while her children sang. Daniel made everyone laugh with funny stories about growing up on the ranch. And through it all, Austin and Rose sat together, holding hands, their eyes meeting frequently in wordless communication that came from knowing someone completely after 40 years of marriage. When Austin passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1929 at the age of 73, Rose grieved but did not break. She had been given 47 years with the love of her life, 47 years of happiness she never would have had without that night by the river. She continued living at the ranch, surrounded by family, spending her days sewing and gardening and spoiling her grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She told stories about Austin to anyone who would listen, keeping his memory alive and vibrant. She visited his grave on the hill next to John and Sarah every week, talking to him about the family and the ranch and how much she missed him. Rose lived to the remarkable age of 81, passing away peacefully in 1940 surrounded by 3 generations of the family she and Austin had created. Her last words were, "I will be with Austin soon," said with a smile of anticipation. They buried her next to Austin under a shared headstone that read, "Austin and Rose Sutherland, united in life and death. Their love will echo through generations." The Double J Ranch continued to prosper under the stewardship of their descendants, the Sutherland name becoming a permanent fixture in Montana history. Every generation that came after knew the story of how it all began. How a cowboy named Austin had found a woman named Rose crying by a river and offered her simple words of comfort that changed both their lives forever. Those gentle words, "You are not alone," became a family motto of sorts, a reminder to always look out for those in need, to offer kindness to strangers, to believe that love could grow from the darkest circumstances into something beautiful and lasting. And sometimes, on summer evenings when the light was just right, people claimed to see 2 figures by the river, an older couple sitting close together, watching the water flow past as they had done so many times in life. Whether it was memory, imagination, or something more mystical, the sightings always brought a feeling of peace and rightness, as though Austin and Rose were still watching over the land they had loved and the family they had built, together even in death as they had always been in life. Their story became the kind of legend that gets passed down through generations, told at family gatherings and written in journals, a testament to the power of compassion and the way one moment of kindness can ripple out to affect countless lives. Every time someone in the Sutherland family helped a stranger or showed unexpected grace to someone in need, they were honoring Austin and Rose's legacy, keeping alive the spirit of that night by the river when everything changed. And so their love story, born from tragedy and desperation, nurtured through kindness and devotion, and fulfilled through decades of partnership and family, became not just their story but the foundation upon which an entire family legacy was built. From that single moment when Austin heard Rose crying and chose to stop, to help, to care, came generations of Sutherlands who learned to do the same. The cowboy's gentle words had indeed changed both their lives forever, and in doing so, had changed countless other lives as well. Ripples spreading out from one act of kindness by a river in Montana Territory on a summer evening in 1882.